Okay, we are all set up for the 1943 campaign scenario for Fleet Commander Nimitz. I have placed all the individual units in their required locations, and I have randomized all of the Japanese stacks. Let's work our way through a campaign turn. We'll just follow along on the sequence of play printed on the game's map. The first thing we're going to do is advance the turn counter. Next up is the U.S. resupply phase. This is our opportunity to purchase new forces, repair previously damaged forces from a previous turn. We check our campaign sheet and see that we receive 15 supply points and 14 reinforcement points for this campaign turn. We'll put our 14 reinforcement points up here by the U.S. reinforcement box, and our 15 supply points here in the supply point box. Reinforcement points may only be spent to purchase reinforcements from the U.S. reinforcement boxes. Costs of units will be in brackets on each counter, with the exception of aircraft carriers. Their purchase cost will be in parentheses. We'll go ahead and pick up a carrier for 6, a cruiser for 9, we'll pick up a bomber, which will take us up to 11, the 3rd Marine, which will take us up to 13, and a couple more infantry at 1 apiece. Whoops. A 1 infantry, which takes us up to our 14 reinforcement points. Our 14 reinforcement points now spent, we'll place our newly purchased units in the American West Coast. Should point out, normal supply points can also be spent and contributed to purchase reinforcements as well. I neglected to mention that during the game's setup, all of your objectives for your selected campaign will be listed on the campaign setup sheet. Objectives held by the United States are marked in blue. Objectives held by Japan are marked in red. Any objective that is still being contested by both American and Japanese forces is also marked in red. Continuing with the U.S. resupply phase, we can also repair previously damaged units for half their supply point purchase cost, rounding down. So for example, this cruiser worth 3 supply points would be able to be repaired and flipped back over to its full strength side for 1 supply point. Now we'll move on to the U.S. scouting phase. This is where, for a cost of 1 supply point per scout, you can get a forward look at where Japanese forces will be moving. We've paid a supply point. Let's put a scouting marker on this large group of Japanese naval vessels in the Carolines. Roll a 1d10 on the Japanese orders chart to find out where that Japanese force will be moving to. We rolled an 8. So the Japanese force indicated will move toward the closest U.S. forces. 3 ships, 1 infantry, and 2 land-based aircraft if there are already Japanese forces ashore at the location that we're moving to. Where 2 or more possible destinations are equally eligible, use a die roll or whatever means you find most convenient to determine which one will be selected randomly. Alright, we've randomly selected the Solomon Islands. Our engage order that we rolled for tells us to take 3 ships. Now remember, we've randomized this stack, so we just take the top 3 ships off the stack, 1 infantry, and 2 land-based aircraft. There are no land-based aircraft on the Carolines, so we won't worry about that. However, we cannot remove the last infantry off of any location. So in a case where the Japanese will be moving somewhere where U.S. forces are present, they will get a bonus infantry. So we're going to take a unit from the Japanese battalion box, take that battalion and place it on a transport marker and add it to our force moving to the Solomons. Now this is a scouted force. They're not there yet. So now we flip our scouting marker to in transit. Scouting attempts are limited by the counter mix. There are 4 scouting counters, so if we wanted to spend the supply points, we could scout 3 more areas around the map. Or if we wanted, we could continue to scout this large stack up to 3 more times. With our scouting phase now complete, we'll move on to the movement phase, which includes U.S. movement and then Japanese movement. U.S. movement first. As part of my movement, I think I'd like to launch an invasion of Japanese-held Wake Island. As part of my force, I'm going to take the carrier Essex, along with a cruiser, the 3rd Marine Infantry Unit, and a couple of battalions from the American West Coast. I'm going to add 1 more naval unit from Hawaii and move them to Wake Island. That is 6 units total that we're moving. Units can be moved anywhere on the map. Every unit moved costs 1 supply point to move. We just moved 6 units to Wake Island, which leaves us 7 supply points. We've got a submarine group in Hawaii and another submarine group down here in Australia. Let's move those 2 submarine units to the submarine rating box. We'll discuss that submarine rating box more in a few minutes. Right now, I'd also like to bring a little bit more infantry to this engagement going on in New Guinea. So I'll grab a couple from the American West Coast, and since there's Japanese forces at New Guinea, since it's an ongoing engagement, I'll put those 2 infantry forces on a transport counter. Place them next to New Guinea. Moving those 2 infantry cost us another 2 supply points. Best to hang on to at least a couple or 3 supply points for later. We'll see why. With the U.S. portion of the movement phase now complete, we'll move on to the Japanese orders phase. Before continuing with the Japanese movement phase, I should let you know that the last land-based unit, whether it be American or Japanese, whether it be infantry or land-based aircraft, can never be moved out of an area. Also, infantry that are occupying the same area as any enemy force also cannot be moved out of that area. So we'll begin the Japanese movement phase by placing moved counters on any Japanese force that is not allowed to move. With that completed, it should also be noted that rule does not apply to the Japan area or the East Asia area. The last force can be moved out of those areas. Japanese movement that was scouted ahead of time is now considered complete. Remove the in-transit marker and replace it with a moved marker. Remember, this is a combat move, since American forces are here. That Japanese infantry is going to have to land during the combat phase. Now, for each area on the map, in any order you wish, begin rolling on the Japanese orders chart for all Japanese forces that are eligible to receive possible movement orders. You're going to be rolling a 1d10. On a roll of a 1 or a 2, those units will hold up to 6 ships, 2 infantry, and 3 land-based aircraft, always in that order. They will not move, and they will gain 1 resupply marker. For every hold order, you're going to place that resupply marker up here in the Japanese resupply box. A roll of a 3 would be a refit. Up to 4 ships, 1 infantry, and no land-based aircraft will return to Japan. A roll of 4 would be a south order for 3 ships, up to 1 infantry, and up to 2 land-based aircraft. The asterisk indicates that those 2 land-based aircraft would only be moved if Japanese forces are already ashore at the destination. If we had been rolling for the Philippines and received that south order, we have no ships in this area, so we don't worry about them. We take our 1 infantry and 2 land-based aircraft, and we would move them south to Borneo and add them to the units already there. If we had received that south order for the Carolines, we'd be moving south to New Guinea with our 3 ships. And since it's a combat move, the Japanese will get a bonus infantry from the battalion box. There are no land-based aircraft in the Carolines. We don't worry about them. Now again, it's a combat move, so these Japanese infantry, rather than being placed directly on the island, will go on a transport. They'll have to land in a combat phase. A roll of 5 or 6 will send forces east, 1 closer to Hawaii, that has Japanese forces already ashore, with up to 4 ships, 2 infantry, and 2 land-based aircraft. So, that's 4 ships, up to 2 infantry. Now, since this is not a combat move, the Japanese do not get any bonus infantry out of the battalion box. and 2 land-based aircraft. There are no land-based aircraft on the Carolines that can be moved. A roll of 7 is to join a battle somewhere on the map with up to 2 ships, 1 infantry, and 2 land-based aircraft if Japanese forces are already ashore. And battles, of course, will be anywhere that there are both US and Japanese forces present. In this case, it could be Wake Island, the Solomon Islands, or New Guinea. You would determine randomly with a die roll which battle those forces would join. The remainder, engage, reinforce, and sortie, are pretty self-explanatory. Again, if there is more than one location that is equally eligible for movement, you would determine them randomly. That covers Japanese orders. Oh, and anytime an order cannot be performed, or anytime an order does not result in the movement of Japanese forces, it will default to the hold order. No movement, gain a resupply marker. Once you have completed rolling for orders for all Japanese forces capable of receiving orders, you're going to remove the moved markers from the map and move on to the resolve battles phase. Any location on the map that is occupied by both American and Japanese naval forces or land-based units, combat must be resolved. We'll start with Wake Island. Start by moving the US forces to the battle map. Next, move Japanese forces to the battle map according to the instructions in the rulebook. The setup may be a little bit different depending on whether or not there are aircraft carriers present in the battle. Aircraft carriers, whether American or Japanese, must always be placed in the outside ocean area. Any American or Japanese land-based aircraft would be placed on the airfield locations. Any infantry that are already ashore would be placed in their respective foxholes. Infantry that will be landing during combat are placed on their transports in the coastal area. And in the case of the Americans, non-aircraft carrier naval units, they can be placed in either the ocean or coastal areas. The number and type of carrier-based aircraft to place with each aircraft carrier, whether Japanese or American, will be listed on your campaign setup sheet. Once all your forces have been placed on the battle map, you can mark the location of the battle on your campaign map if you'd like. Next, we'll roll to determine the number of battle turns for this battle. We rolled a 7 on a 1d10, which means there will be 3 battle turns for this combat. Next, we determine the number of Japanese battle plans, each battle turn, that the Japanese will receive. This is done by counting up the number of Japanese forces that will be taking part in the battle, excluding carrier-based aircraft and transports. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, the battalion there, 5, 6, 7 Japanese units. And so with 7 units, the Japanese will be making 2 battle plan draws per battle turn. Next, we select US battle plans. Battle plans are little advantages given to your forces over the course of the battle. Japanese battle plans, which we'll see, are persistent throughout a battle turn, whereas American battle plans, once they are used, they are discarded. By default, we are given 3 battle plan points to spend on battle plans. I think I'm going to spend all 3 of those battle plan points on the diving attack battle plan. In addition, I'm going to spend 1 of my 3 leftover supply points to purchase 3 more battle plan points. And I believe for those 3 battle plan points, I will choose anti-aircraft for 1, and artillery for 2 more. I've now finished purchasing American battle plans. One more quick thing about setting up for combat. There are 2 Japanese land-based aircraft on the island, so their airfield will automatically be assigned a strength value of 2. With the setup for combat now complete, we move on to combat. Take all of your Japanese battle plans and place them into a draw cup. And we're going to draw 2 Japanese battle plan counters. I received screening ship and attack plan. Next, we move our U.S. aircraft anywhere on the combat display we want. I've left one of my Hellcat fighters down here to fly cap for my aircraft carrier. I've sent one of my bombers to bomb the Japanese airfields, my 2 other bombers and my other Hellcat to attack the Japanese carrier force in the ocean area. Next, we move Japanese aircraft as groups. First bombers, then fighters. For example, all bombers belonging to an aircraft carrier's bomb group is considered one group. All bombers that are land-based would be considered their own group. We've rolled a 2 for the Zukaku's 2 bomber units. Since there are no American bombing targets for the Japanese planes to attack in the Japanese ocean area, we then move up to the next highest value area, which would be the island. There are no American forces that have gone ashore yet, so we move to the next highest area up again, which would be coastal. Therefore, the 2 bombers from the Japanese aircraft carrier, they'll be attacking the American invasion force in the coastal area. The Japanese land-based bomber rolled an 8, which moves him to the American ocean area. He'll be attacking the American carrier force. Now we move the fighters. A 7 for the carrier-based fighter puts him in the ocean area. A 1 for the land-based fighter puts him back up in the Japanese ocean area. Looks like he's flying cap for the Japanese invasion fleet. Let's have a quick look at some of the units. Aircraft, we'll start with fighters. Fighter units, up in the top right-hand corner, will have their attack value. This aircraft must roll a 5 or less to hit in air-to-air combat. This 3 superscript means if he rolls 3 or less, he will score 2 hits. Bomber aircraft will often have no fighter value. They will have numbers down in the bottom right-hand corner. The number bordered in blue, that's the number they must roll or less to hit a naval target. And the number in the brown border is the number they must roll or less in order to hit a land-based target. Now, as you can see, the Hellcat here, he also has both a fighter and bomber value, so he can make attacks for both bomber and dogfight phases. Carrier-based aircraft will always have this blue border along the bottom edge, and land-based aircraft will not. Naval units have three values. Their anti-aircraft value, that's the number or less they must roll during the anti-aircraft fire phase. A surface attack value, the number they must roll or less during naval gun phase. And the anti-submarine value, the number they must roll or less to hit an enemy submarine. You'll notice aircraft carriers do not have a naval gun value, but they do have a superscript value for their anti-aircraft rating. Submarines have no anti-aircraft capability. Note the blue border for their naval gunnery ability. This means they can only hit naval targets. During the actual combat sequence, dogfight is first up, with all aircraft capable of air-to-air attacks resolving their combat. On a roll of 6 or less, our F-6F would inflict an air-to-air hit on one of the Japanese units. 3 or less, 2 hits. All combat is simultaneous. Because of our Japanese attack plan, a roll of 8 or less would score a hit for the A6M. 4 or less, 2 hits. If our F6F in this example rolled a 2, both hits would have to be assigned to the Japanese A6M fighter. Hits must always be allocated to units in order of lowest value to highest. So in this case, both hits would have to be assigned to the Japanese 0. Again, combat is simultaneous. So even though the 0 was shot down, he still got to make his attack roll, dealing 1 hit to our F-6F. Once all air-to-air dogfighting is complete, we'll move on to anti-aircraft fire from the ships. Each ship may make a maximum of 1 anti-aircraft attack. In addition, each aircraft may only be targeted once by each type of attacking vessel. So for example, the aircraft carrier would be able to make 1 attack. The escort vessel would also be able to attack this aircraft. In a case where there are more vessels than aircraft to attack, for example in this case, each group of ships would be able to fire once with their highest anti-aircraft rated unit. So here, either one of the aircraft carriers could fire. Here, only the battleship would be able to fire. The Essex has scored a hit on the Japanese bomber. Then, using our anti-aircraft battle plan that we purchased, we may take an extra anti-aircraft roll for the aircraft carrier, scoring an additional hit, destroying the Japanese aircraft. Land-based aircraft are removed from the game permanently, and American battle plans, once used, are discarded for the remainder of the battle. Once all US and Japanese anti-aircraft fire is resolved, we move on to bomb runs. In this example, we have 2 Japanese bombers attacking ships in the coastal area. They're attacking naval targets, so they would need to roll 4 or less and 6 or less respectively. Thanks to their attack plan, battle plan, we can see that the Japanese have scored 1 hit. Now again, hits must be distributed according to the least valuable unit. Now, the infantry has the benefit of the 4 value on the transport counter. So we could assign the hits to we could either give 1 hit to the battleship, or we could assign a hit to 1 of the infantry on the transport. If the escort vessel here were, say, a value of 3, we would have to assign that hit to the escort vessel. In the case of distributing damage to land-based bombing targets, again, normally we would assign damage from the lowest valued unit to the highest. But in order to inflict damage on land-based infantry, your own friendly infantry must be ashore, either on the beaches or in the foxholes. So, in the case of this hit, even though the Japanese battalion is value 0, since we have no infantry ashore yet, we would need to assign the hit to the Japanese airfield, which is at a value of 1. Once all bomb runs on the map have been resolved, we move on to torpedoes and depth charges. All submarines that may be on the map get to make their attacks. Once that's completed, all surface naval units get to make a roll for their anti-submarine attack. Each submarine can only be targeted once by the ships for anti-submarine attack. So you would take your ship with the highest anti-submarine value and roll for it. All ships in the coastal area may now do combat in the naval guns step. All ships in the coastal area with a naval gun rating will conduct an attack. They can attack targets in order of value on either the island or in the opposing coastal area. So, for example, the South Dakota, if it were to roll 5 or less, it would score 1 hit. The battalion is worth 0. The airfield value is 1. The cruiser is worth a 2. The transport has a value of 4. So we would have to assign this hit. Again, normally it would be to the infantry. However, since there's no U.S. infantry ashore yet, we would have to assign that hit to the Japanese airfield, taking away its last strength point. Once all eligible naval gunfire has been resolved, we then move on to infantry combat. Only opposing infantry occupying the foxhole positions may conduct combat. Combat would be simultaneous, with the Japanese unit scoring a hit on a roll of a 1, or the U.S. unit scoring a hit on a roll of 5 or less. Again, assigning damage to either opposing infantry or airfields in order of value, lowest to highest. If these U.S. forces only occupied the beaches, only the Japanese would be allowed to attempt an attack. And if the U.S. forces are not ashore yet, the infantry combat phase would be skipped completely. Once all infantry combat has been resolved, move on to the infantry advance step. All infantry on transports is moved to the beach position. The transport counters then get removed and set aside. Any units that were already in the beach positions on a previous combat turn would be advanced to the foxhole position. Next up, return all aircraft to their respective aircraft carriers or airfields. Once all aircraft have been returned to their airfield or aircraft carrier, we then inflict airfield losses. Our Japanese airfields initially had a strength of 2, but it took 2 points of combat damage. Now that the Japanese airfields have been destroyed, the Japanese land-based aircraft have nowhere to land. So they would both be destroyed and removed from the game. If only 1 point of strength was left for the Japanese airfield, we would destroy Japanese aircraft in order of their value. A damaged aircraft carrier cannot take aboard or launch carrier-based aircraft. So in the case of a damaged aircraft carrier, all of its carrier-based aircraft would be destroyed and removed from the battle. And then the final combat step is to simply advance the battle turn counter. Then go back and repeat the combat steps until one side or the other is wiped out or the battle turn counter runs down to 0. You'll start by discarding the Japanese battle plans from the previous combat phase and drawing the required number of new ones. Once the battle has been resolved, return any remaining forces to the map, change the status of the objective if necessary. Once all battles on the map have been resolved, we move on to the Japanese reinforcement phase. For possible Japanese reinforcements, roll 1d10. For each resupply order, add 1 to your die roll, so here we would have 12. Subtract 1 for each damaged Japanese force. This does not include damaged infantry occupying the same area as American infantry. There is 1 damaged naval vessel, so that takes it down to 11, and then -2 per submarine raider, which takes it down to 7. Therefore, the Japanese will receive 2 ships, 1 infantry, and 1 land-based aircraft. 2 ships, 1 infantry, and 1 land-based aircraft are placed in Japan. Next up is the Japanese repair phase. Any Japanese unit that is damaged on the map, with the exception of Japanese infantry that's damaged and occupying the same area as American infantry, damaged units are flipped to their full strength side and returned to the bottom of their respective reinforcement pile. So in the case of this damaged Japanese cruiser, we flip it to its full strength side and return it to the reinforcement box underneath the other naval units. Next up is the U.S. return to port phase. All ships on the map that are not either in Hawaii or the U.S. West Coast are collected and placed in the proper return to port box. This is the 1943 scenario, so they would be placed here. This includes submarines you may have had in the submarine rating box. To elaborate a little bit further, as part of the game's setup, you may already have ships in the return to port boxes, or perhaps as a result from previous campaign turns. So what you would do is move the ships in the 1942 box to the Hawaiian Islands, They're now ready for action on the coming campaign turn. Ships in the 1943 box move up to the 1942 box, and then the ships that you've collected on your current turn get placed in the 1943 box. Next up is the U.S. supply check. In order to check for supply, starting from the American West Coast, you must be able to follow a path of uninterrupted American-controlled areas to whichever area you're checking supply for. For example, Wake Island, if Midway was being contested or was under Japanese control, Wake Island would be considered out of supply. Infantry and land-based aircraft on Wake would have to be flipped over to their reduced side. And finally, the U.S. defeat check. For the defeat check, count up the number of objectives on the map that are under U.S. control. At the end of each campaign turn, 4 or fewer objectives in, for example, the 1943 scenario, means you have been replaced, you lose the game. Also, at the end of the campaign, you'll repeat this same process to find your rating for how you performed for the game. It should also be noted that if any point in the game any Japanese force moves into the Hawaiian Islands area, if they are not completely expelled in one battle turn, you will automatically lose the game. This completes a full campaign turn for Fleet Commander Nimitz. Move on to the next campaign turn and continue through the sequence of play again until you either receive a poor rating in the U.S. defeat check or until you reach the end of the campaign and receive your final rating then. Thank you for joining me, everybody. Happy gaming.